Chers auditeurs,
Dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome to Comme d'Archi Podcast Season 6.
Saison 6, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
And in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Deponte, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne-Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci
Thank you
d'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
to be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Dear listeners, this is Esther on behalf of Anne-Charlotte. I'm delighted to welcome you today to a sport format on the theme of Gothic cathedrals. Naturally, I thought of offering you an issue on Notre-Dame, all the more so as my family has a special attachment to the cathedral, since my grandfather, Joseph Beuchet, an organ builder, restored the organ there in the 1930s. At the time, he was head of the large Cavalier-Coll factory. I have to admit that the array of magnificent television reports on Notre Dame broadcast at the end of 2024 have somewhat helped me to give up this idea. And unless one day the architect in charge of the cathedral, Philippe Villeneuve, agrees to appear on Comme d'Archi, I'd be delighted. In the meantime, I thought it would be more appropriate to talk about the Gothic cathedral in its entirety and to recall some of its fundamentals. Until now, I've rarely spoken to you about churches, although I've always loved them. Not that I am a bigot, despite spending over 10 years in a school with nuns. It's just that transcendence has always fascinated me, and today I regret so much the collective abandonment of these roots. Of course, I'm wary above all of dogma, which allows power-hungry people the most terrible abuses, religion or no religion, because that applies to everything human. As nature abhors a vacuum, it would be terrible to see the Church's eldest daughter witness her own demise. At least, that's what I think. I also think that the ordeal of Notre-Dame being burned and then saved almost miraculously reminds us of our roots and brings renewed interest. So, let's slip into this breach, however fragile, and land in the heart of Gothic art. But what is this art? It's true that the general public thinks it's defined by the ribbed vault. However, ribbed vaults have been used since the Romanesque period, as have pointed arches, which were already common in the Romanesque era. For ribbed vaults, let's cite the Romanesque Abbey Church of Sainte-Trinité in Le Sey, Normandy, France. And yet, ribbed vaults are paradoxically Gothic. Let's just say, then, that a technique alone cannot define a style, given that the Gothic style took hold from 1140 until the 16th century and well beyond. The first Gothic monuments were built in Île-de-France and Haute-Picardie, where Romanesque art already existed. In Reims, Chartres, and Amiens, Romanesque cathedrals pre-existed Gothic buildings. The consecration of the facade block of Saint-Denis on June 9, 1140 by Abbot Suger marked the starting point of the Gothic style. The political context played in its favor. Within the Western states, royalty was establishing its sovereignty, while feudalism and even the papacy were in decline. Saint-Denis is a royal abbey, where kings are buried. It preserves the insignia of royalty. In the midst of commercial and industrial growth, Gothic architecture is defined as a genuine urban development in historical continuity with Romanesque cathedrals. Intellectually, scholastic thought, with Abelard and later Thomas Aquinas, among others, attempting to reconcile reason and faith, stimulated this spiritual impulse. The cathedral offers an organized, rational whole where the light diffused by the stained glass windows allows the faithful to pass from material things to immaterial ones. Rational organization is a constant feature of Gothic art. Gothic art is concerned with the human body and psychological expression. It proposes a unity of vaulting and gradually eliminates anything that opposes this unity, such as tribunes, crypts, and facade blocks. In the logic of the layout, the elements are gradually brought into line with each other. Saint-Denis and Troyes cathedrals are two examples of perfect formal encroachment. But since perfection is not a given, each context offers its own variations, and each building is the product of a skillful alchemy that reflects the eras in question, the region, the builders, and the religion. For example, with the death of Saint Louis, confidence in the power of reason waned, marking a return to the irrational and favoring mysticism. Then came the Renaissance, which defined Gothic as ugly. However, Gothic continued unabated until the 19th century, when it was revived with fervor in the neo-Gothic style. Fortunately, Gothic has now been stripped of its negative connotations. But let's go back to its origins. From 1150 to 1270, numerous building sites were opened in a relatively small area, the Paris Basin. After the death of Saint Louis on August 25, 1270, construction activity slowed. Programs were less ambitious, and people sought to complete projects on a more ad hoc basis. Cathedrals were financed by the revenues of chapters and bishops from their lands. In addition, there was the so-called extraordinary income from quests, which made use of the great devotion of the people of the time to relics. That said, construction work came to a standstill at times, with empty coffers needing to be replenished in order to continue. The higher up the building you go, the more expensive it becomes, since elevation requires more technical skills and resources, such as lifting equipment and scaffolding. From the secrecy of master builders has led to the belief that cathedrals were anonymous, which is not correct. The labyrinths of Reims and Amiens, for example, show the names of the master builders and their role in the construction. It wasn't until the 14th century that the master builder became an architect in the modern sense, designing and directing, but leaving the execution to others. It was during the 13th century that the practice of architectural drawing became widespread. In most cases, the building site faces east, which is logical, given that the essential part of the church is its sanctuary. However, this is not always the case. Sometimes, the old church is surrounded to ensure continuity of worship. The construction of cathedrals spans several generations, 100 years or so, during which several builders succeed one another. But overall, there are no major changes to the initial program. In conclusion, no cathedral was ever truly completed. However, Gothic art is not limited to this program. Abbeys, collegiate churches, and parish churches all bear witness to the many adaptations and variants of Gothic religious architecture. I wanted to share a few fundamentals that many of you probably already know during this week of transition between 2024 and 2025. And that something profound, transcendental, is accompanying us as we rebuild our fractured world. I hope to see you again later in the year to move on to the constructive techniques of the Gothic edifice. In the meantime, we've got a lot of testimonials to share in the first quarter of 2025. And next week, we'll be talking transition, because I think a lot of the weak signals seem to be pointing us in the right direction again. On this Gothic impulse and the particular light it brings us, I wish you a good week, and I hope to see you next week for a new Com d'Archi. And a very happy new year to you all.
Thank you for listening.
And thanks to the sound engineer who was collaborating with us today.
Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at Com d'Archi Podcast.
If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.